Is episode 762 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I'm very pleased to be joined by returning guest Philip K. Howard. He is a lawyer, author, and civic leader. He is chair of Common Good, a nonpartisan organization aimed at simplifying government. He grew up in Kentucky and lives in New York City. Welcome back to the show, Philip.
Great to be with you, Paul.
Yeah, a lot of great stuff in your latest book here that we're going to be talking about, Saving Can Do. And I definitely enjoyed reading that one and have a lot of questions for you. But before we dive into this book, the last time we talked, I don't remember exactly what month it was, but I know Doge was a thing. Let's just say that at that time, and I think it was already getting rolling. So we must have had our last conversation sometime in February or January or something like that, and uh, we kind of had a not a debate, but a discussion about Doge and its prospects for success at restraining and reforming government. And you were pretty skeptical at the time. I was slightly more optimistic, but I'm just going to go out and say it. I think you were proven right on Doge and its unfortunate failure. So, uh, what what brought you to that point? Why did you think that, and what's your take now? Now that kind of the failures have been manifested.
Well, I was also very hopeful and wrote a column in the Wall Street Journal after they announced Doge, saying all the great things they could do. That government was really long overdue for a spring cleaning and to, make things looking at it from the standpoint of its efficiency and how it worked. Um, but but when Musk settled in, almost immediately, it looked like his focus was just cutting programs and cutting government, not making them more effective. Um, and I understand that instinct, and I think disrupting the system was a good idea. But um, but the reason Washington is tangled in red tape is because they've written all these laws and regulations over the last 50 years that require people to go through all these legal hurdle, run a legal gauntlet, basically. Um, and so if you really want to cut government, the thing to do is to create simpler lines of decision-making authority and cut the requirement for all the red tape. And then you can get rid of people. But if you simply fire people without getting rid of the requirements, you end up getting paralysis because the law still says you have to go through all those steps. So he just didn't think it through.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with that. Now, my criticism or concern was much more geared towards the fact that Congress really wasn't able or wasn't brought to the table. They weren't engaged in the process. And, if you just obviously study basic, eighth grade civics, you know that the budgets are put together by Congress, and they're the ones that can spend the money. And unless you work with Congress to make sure that that less money is spent, and that there's an opportunity to create efficiencies in government that is sustainable with Congress's buy-in, you're really going to be uh, kind of just doing a lot of
Right.
hand waving and cutting that isn't going to be sustainable budgetarily speaking. Now, what's your take on that criticism?
Well, I think that's correct. But for Congress to get involved, they have to want to get involved.
Fair,
And
yes.
and and Congress has become a performative institution, as we see in the shutdown and other aspects. People, I would be broader. I mean, people in Washington don't really want to take responsibility to do things. They want to make the other side look bad, and
Right.
and they do fine doing it that way. And so Congress should definitely be involved. I and others have written about how congressional committees should have much more authority to oversee regulatory agencies and to see where they've gone, run amok and such. And and Congress hasn't picked up on any of those ideas. They really, it's been so long since they took responsibility that it seems as if the leadership in Congress really doesn't want to take responsibility.
Well, do you think that that is something where the executive, it's like a convenient parlor game for both of them. The executive, obviously the president in this case, sees congressional weakness and takes advantage of it, and that if a president said, "Okay, Congress, you guys need to pull your weight," do you think that they would be willing to respond, especially being of the same party as Trump? Obviously, lacking 60 votes for the filibuster, but and that's a real challenge. Is that Congress? Nothing is demanded of them because the presidents of both parties have been so willing to take on the
Right.
more power, not just executive power, but legislative power, and just make all the decisions themselves. It's not a healthy dynamic on both sides of
Right.
that equation.
Right. It's almost as if we have a kind of a elected temporary monarchy,
Right.
you know, and the legislature is largely vestigial. Um, well, in connection with the shutdown of government, uh, Trump has demanded that Congress end the filibuster in order to get a majority vote and move a budget forward or have a continuing resolution. And the leadership of Congress has refused to go along with what Trump wants. So they're not doing what Trump wants.
Yes, and there's obviously a lot of uh, reasons for a lot of these things. Well, I didn't want to get sidetracked. I want to talk about your book and some of the things you bring up in there. And I just was writing questions down, and I wanted to start you off with this one. Uh, your new book talks about fundamental changes that occurred during the 1960s. Uh, what are you specifically referring to? Because a lot happened in the 1960s, and obviously the Civil Rights Act is part of that. But you seem to be referring to maybe a more litigious attitude, a more regulatory attitude, the rise of the welfare state. Are those the kinds of things you're concerned about, or if not, what do you want to add to that? What is
Well, I think
specifically
there's a
about the
lot to
60s?
argue about when it comes to policy, and there were a number of policy changes in the 60s, most of which I think were necessary. The anti-discrimination laws, environmental laws, that sort of thing. I think the change in the 1960s that I object to the most, that I think has really corroded the fabric of America's culture, was was changed not in policy but in the operating systems of government, how decisions get made, how a school is run, whether a teacher has authority in the classroom, whether anyone has authority to give a permit to modernize infrastructure, that sort of thing. And and what happened after the 1960s is that we had a radical change in operating philosophy from a human responsibility model where law sets a framework for authority, provides checks and balances to safeguard against decisions, but where officials or teachers, whoever it is, whoever's working for the government, has room to use their judgment to do their job. We move from that model, a human responsibility model, to a legal compliance model. And so now the question for almost any decision, including maintaining order in the classroom, it literally goes down to that level, is did you comply with the law? Can you prove in a legal proceeding that your decision was fair? And we've infected uh, really all choices at all levels of government and increasingly society with this. It's as if we have a little lawyer on our shoulders listening to, well, can I prove that Johnny threw the pencil first? How do I, or if you're an environmental official, how do you prove that the benefits of the transmission line outweigh the harms of building it through the pristine forest? Well, I can't prove that. So let's just study it some more. And so then you get 10 years of review and nothing ever gets built. So we've created this paralytic society where not only does government not work, but now we've lost sight of the basic values of a free society, sort of truthfulness and reciprocity, being fair. Now it's like the whole society is infected with selfishness because no one who runs an institution has the authority anymore to decide right and wrong.
Now, was that a cultural change? Was that a legal change? What is it just something that kind of happened? Because I agree with you that that is a serious problem, but it's kind of hard to understand what, if anything, was
It,
done.
well, first of all, it was a legal change, but it came from a cultural place.
All right.
We didn't want to have any more abuses like racism. So the way to eliminate abuses of authority, the geniuses at the time thought, was to eliminate authority. Give everyone individual rights to object to any decision. You can't fire me unless you can prove that I'm no good. Well, how do you prove somebody doesn't cooperate or has bad judgment or whatever? And so you have this society where law is supposed to be a framework on like a fence around the corral that protects free interaction. Now the land of the free has become a legal minefield. Nothing gets done, starting in government, but increasingly in society too, because of somebody will claim it violates their rights. Well, what about my rights? I mean, so so we had this idea that we didn't want any more abuses of authority, and then we changed our legal system. We changed it. This is very to try to prescribe choices in detail, tell people how to do things correctly. I'll give you lots of examples of that. And if you couldn't have a rule to have a procedure where you have legal hearings where you're supposed to show by objective evidence that a decision to build a power line, say, or to discipline the student is accurate or fair. And then just to make sure nothing unfair ever happens, you let anybody who doesn't like it bring a legal action, claim their rights are violated. And so the result was not to enhance freedom, but to really destroy it. I mean, I'll give you an example. So it's just in law. In 1956, Congress passed a 29-page law authorizing the Interstate Highway Act. 29 pages. 10 years later, 21,000 miles of road had been built. The last transportation bill in Congress was over 1,000 pages long, or about 1,000, implemented by tens of thousands of pages of rules and regulations. And it will take 10 years just to get approval for one stretch of road. Not to build it, just to get approval for it. So that's a difference. It's not a cultural difference. That's a legal difference.
Well, I guess, and I mean, again, agree with you, but I was recently reading the book about Robert Moses. And for those who don't know, and you mentioned Robert Moses in your book, this is the guy who really made New York City what it is today. And he was very abusive in his approach to power as this kind of all-seeing planning officer of the city of New York and in some cases the state of New York. And it, I guess that is what these regulations are supposed to push back against or prohibit. And I don't think anybody would say that there's any modern day Robert Moseses out there really ramming through highways and abusing the system. And like I said, there's a mixed record there. I'm not saying all of Robert
Right.
Moses is bad or good, but I guess that seems to be, if anything, the regulations are a response to people like that. So I guess what's your
But there's a lot of room between paralysis and autocracy.
yeah, I agree with
So,
you. It's just tough. It
so
seems to be tough for government to get to that.
right. So just to so the National Environmental Policy Act, which was 1970, was intended to require environmental review, which Congress thought might be a few dozen pages and take a few months, so that there would be public transparency of the main effects of a proposed piece of infrastructure, big public project. Very good idea. It has metastasized into a process of no pebble left unturned, where it can take literally a decade and thousands of pages of review of every conceivable impact, no pebble left unturned. And that doesn't actually enhance transparency, it obscures transparency, because what's important gets lost in those thousands of pages. And so what's needed to build infrastructure is to give the official who's in charge of deciding how much review the authority to decide what's important. And that can be reviewed, but reviewed only as to whether his review is so shoddy as to not be in good faith or something. And then to give another official the authority to decide whether the trade-offs are worth it. You can have review, have it be completed, and have a decision for most projects within a year easily. That's not Robert Moses. There's public disclosure. People can argue about it, whatever. But then a decision is made, and then whoever makes the decision should be politically accountable. That's how a democracy works. But instead, we've gone from somebody doing something in the middle of the night without anybody knowing it's happening to a system where nobody can do anything for years or longer.
Yeah, no doubt. All right. Well, you talk about lawyers, and obviously lawyers are a big part of our public policy world. Right here in New Mexico, we're talking a lot about the medical malpractice situation and the medical provider shortage that we suffer from. But you definitely highlight the negative role that lawyers and the regulations they create, and that the impact it has on doing anything, doing public projects, etc., success in school. Talk about why specifically lawyers. Why do you have ire for them?
Well, first, of course, I am a lawyer, so I'm qualified to speak about the abuses and idiocies of lawyers. Well, I think first of all, a lot of lawyers make money on the current red tape situation. I mean, America has many times more lawyers than any other civilized society. It's not because they're teaching schools or doing something productive. It's because they're managing all this red tape and stuff. I would say the most insidious thing about law today is, in addition to red tape, is this idea that anyone can sue for anything. Suing, when you have a kind of a laissez-faire attitude towards lawsuits, it undermines everyone's freedom. If someone sues because there's an accident on the sledding hill, then all the towns shut down the sledding hills, because it doesn't matter what happens in the lawsuit, because they don't want to risk the liability. I'm on the board of a private park, and It's being sued because people trip on the sidewalk. And now our insurance has gone up from, I don't know, $10,000 to hundreds of thousands of dollars over a couple of years because lawyers got the idea that anyone who isn't paying attention and they're looking at their cell phone and they trip and fall and, you know, hurt their knee or ankle or something should sue for, not millions, but for enough money that it, tens of thousands of dollars. Then you have to pay the lawyers, and pretty soon you're up to six figures just to manage this lawsuit. And so, schools have changed the rules in which kids can play because schools are scared of being sued. Medical malpractice keeps doctors from moving to certain states. It raises the cost of healthcare because of so-called defensive medicine. Their hospitals are scared that if the headache turns out to be a tumor, they'll get sued for millions of dollars. So we waste all this money on unnecessary procedures. It's a real problem in our society. And the lawyers are taking advantage of it, but the problem is with the system itself. Courts need to start drawing the lines of who can sue for what, so that in order to protect everyone's freedom.
How about loser pays?
Loser pays would be great.
Yeah, I think that's one great solution to the challenge there. Uh, Now there is a book. Your book, of course, just to repeat, is called "Saving Can Do: How to Revive the Spirit of America." But you there's another book out there called "Abundance" by Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein, and I think it's safe to say that my reading of your book is that it's fairly down the middle. It's not really focused on one political ideology or the other. It's just focused on making government work better. Certainly, you have lawyers and teachers unions in your crosshairs, metaphorically speaking, but those are left wing
Right.
leading, groups, special interests, etc. But Abundance by Thompson and Klein is more focused at some of the same problems I think you're dealing with here, but more looking at the liberal, left of center reader and trying to convince them that some of these government rules, regulations, et cetera, are harming
Right.
uh, left leaning principles and ideas, especially when it comes to, I think, green energy, et cetera. So, uh, how do you see your book relating to that? And I guess if you're coming at it, multiple different groups are coming at it, authors are coming at it from different ideological angles, it does lend
Sure.
credibility to your arguments, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Klein and Thompson are being overtly political. They're trying to persuade people in the Democratic Party that instead of focusing on red tape and process, they should focus on building more. And they tell a lot of stories about how stupidly the red tape is, where a public toilet in San Francisco that's worth $200,000 cost $1,700,000, for example, because of all the public hearings and stuff. So so they tell a lot of good stories about that. And of course, I've been writing about this for a long time, right? My book, The Death of Common Sense, was basically about how idiotic it is when all you do is focus on legal process. So so I like the fact that they're out there and they're, tooting this horn. They don't they don't propose a solution or a different way of making decisions. And I think that's deliberate. Because they don't want to offend left-wing interest groups like the public unions, for example, or the trial lawyers or others, who, or environmental groups for that matter, who who get money or power through the current system. So they don't want to offend them. So the kind of implied conclusion of abundance is that we need to prune the red tape jungle. some. We need to cut back on some of these procedures and rules. And my criticism of that is pretty stark. That doesn't work. It doesn't work because we've written all these rules and procedures to be mandatory. So if you cut out 80% of them, what's left is still mandatory. Did you consult the Native American tribes? Did you do a study of this or that? And there's always going to be something else that someone can complain about that you didn't do. Law in general, particularly regulatory law, shouldn't be mandatory. It should leave room for human judgment to make trade-offs and values about what makes sense for society. And that requires a different way of writing law, not just less of it.
Yeah, it seemed to me that that they also were much more inclined to pick and choose the areas of the economy and the projects that uh, had kind of a more expedited regulatory process. Uh, they, for example, a wind farm or a solar field, a-okay if you kind of cut out most of the regulatory obstacles, but certainly a oil and gas refinery or pipeline or something relating to traditional energy sources, nuclear power plant. Uh, and I'm not disagreeing that there needs to be regulations there, but it seems like they're much more focused on let's just help out these preferred projects that we want to see, and we know that our readers, or at least many of them, want to see as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. I mean, they are picking and choosing, and again, they're being political. I mean, my view is that we need a new movement that's based on that simplifies systems and that honors the idea of human responsibility and accountability. Let somebody make a decision and then let someone else hold them accountable. But this kind of red tape model is just so anti-American. It's like the American version of central planning. I mean, um, I worked on reforms in Congress for environmental review, and I advocated for and Congress enacted 5 years ago um, limits on page limits on environmental reviews, time limits on environmental reviews and approvals. And guess how much difference it's made? None.
Probably not much, yeah.
Yeah, none. And the reason is because those mandates sit in this vast ocean that happens to be about 150 million words of binding law and regulation that's filled with mandates that people don't even know what they are. And there's always one that's not being complied with. So we've built, the legal system in America is now basically quicksand. The idea of moving forward and getting stuff, let's make it happen, is impossible when you're sinking in the quicksand.
Well, I agree with you, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But I want to get one more area that you talk about, which is the education system, and of course the unions, as I mentioned earlier, definitely uh, a group that you criticize. What if you could pick one or two things that unions do in the education system that are really concerning? Uh, why don't you share those with
Sure,
us?
sure. Um, Union controls make it impossible to fix bad schools. The school principals don't have the authority to hold bad teachers accountable and terminate them. And so what that means is there's no mutual trust in the culture because everybody knows that performance doesn't matter. So the main management tool, which is make sure everybody's rowing together and doing their job, they don't have the authority to do because the teachers' unions have made it impossible to get rid of bad teachers. To give a number, in Illinois, an 18-year study found that out of 95,000 teachers, an average of 2 per year were dismissed for performance. In LA a few years ago, they tried to get rid of 7 notoriously bad teachers. They spent, I forget, $8 million or something. Were able to succeed with 4 of them. We're talking, again, tens of thousands of teachers. So there's no accountability and basic management prerogatives, like coming into a classroom to observe a teacher. That's not allowed. You've got to give 7 days notice. Moving a teacher who's not effective with young children into trying her out in another grade level, that's not possible because you're not allowed to move teachers around. So they're unmanageable. Schools are unmanageable. And so you end up with these poor schools with dreary cultures that nobody can do anything about. And it's mainly because of the unions. I mean, the bureaucracy doesn't help. You end up having red tape coming from the state ed department or the federal ed department that's in part designed to counteract the controls of the unions. So they put in rules to try to force the unions to do something. And so you end up having the strings being pulled, sort of red tape strings from the unions on the one hand and the state or federal bureaucracy on the other hand, and the poor teachers and principals are at the bottom of these strings being jerked around all day long.
Yeah. No, I agree with you again on that. Okay, so getting into kind of more of the solutions phase here, and I realize we just talked about education. That somewhat undermines my point here, but you mentioned the 60s, and that's kind of the beginning of the alphabet soup of government agencies that really start to take over in many ways the EPA and some of these other organizations, and getting even back to Robert Moses at the beginning of his career, he really got started taking advantage of New Deal era programs and money and repurposing them for his own benefits and kind of twisting what the original intent of some of these projects and some of this money was in order to fit his own desires. But do you think that what we're dealing with is in many ways a constitutional problem and just shrinking the government at the federal level down to a much more reasonable size would be a huge starting point in some of this, because it seems like that's when the regulations started to get too crazy.
Yes, I agree. I mean, so there are many ways of dealing with. First of all, to the extent that you can put decisions on the ground, from the federal government to the states, from the states to local governments, that's generally better. There's certain kinds of decisions, like, for example, regional infrastructure, that has to be done on a state or national level, because the local communities will just all tend to be NIMBYs, right? They'll say, well, I don't want it here. so you're never going to get the new, rail line or the new power line or whatever. So there are decisions that need to be made at a higher level, but devolving authority down is better. And at every level, giving officials room to use their judgment and be practical. But nothing works unless a person makes it work. If you anything in your life, your think tank, this podcast, any whoever's listening to this, running a family, nothing works because you followed a rule or a list or a protocol. It works because you make it work. I mean, the great line from Thomas Edison, nothing that's any good works by itself. You got to make the damn thing work. Well, that's true in all life endeavor. And we need a government that honors the need for people to do that. And that's I know that what I'm saying is going to be hard to imagine, it requires a new system. This
Well,
system of red tape is a formula for continued failure.
so is there something specific that the New Mexico legislature, the Congress, other state legislatures, who is this just an all hands on deck kind of problem, or is this something that specifically one or another group needs to really take the leadership on? President Trump, next president, governors?
Well, you can do it. You don't have to do it all at once. There are all sorts of, I mean, I've been talking with infrastructure people about a law that says, notwithstanding any other law to the contrary, the way we will make decisions for new transmission lines or whatever it is for the next 5 years will be the following, and just have a list of who makes the decisions and what the review process looks like, and just sail around all the existing law. Without any question, a state legislature could, if it wanted to, give schools much more authority similar to that in charter schools, could pass a law that that allows local school districts basically to avoid all the law and say, here's how you will be held accountable in the following ways for improving the quality of your school. I mean, I'm in the process of organizing a constitutional challenge to public employee unions because they've taken governing authority, the legislators, by giving state legislatures, by giving public unions collective bargaining powers, have basically given away governing authority, where there's a basic principle of constitutional law that you can't delegate governing authority to a private group. You've got to maintain the power and make the decisions. And they've given it to unions. Well, that should be unconstitutional. So I've raised a bunch of money and hired law firms and have constitutional scholars, and we're going to do that next year.
Excellent. Well, that sounds fantastic. Well, before I let you go, uh, in your brief bio there, it's mentioned that you live in New York City. As we record this, it is election day here, and Zoran Mondani is likely to win. I'll have egg on my face if he does not win, and we talk
You and a
about this.
lot of others.
That's why I bring it up at the end.
Right.
So, what is your take on, quickly, what you think of his potential harm or potential benefit, if there is any? So just kind of go through how you're feeling as a New Yorker.
Well, I don't feel good. I mean, but I understand the frustration of voters. We elect people and nothing ever changes. So it's as if both political parties are in a kind of doom loop that goes something like this: first you fail, then I fail. That's sort of how governments work for recent decades. So as a result, we elect people who promise to blow things up. And that was the appeal of Trump, right? And he is disrupting the system. He doesn't have a vision of how to fix it, in my view, but he is disrupting it.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's what Mamdani is saying. I mean, his ideas are lunacy. I mean, it would be, the city would go bankrupt. All the tax base would move away. They can move away instantly. All the 40% of the taxes in New York are paid by a tiny fraction of the residents. They all own jet planes. They can just get in their jets and move to Florida. So it's his policies are incredibly self-destructive, and hopefully, and I think he will be elected, hopefully that we'll learn that his policies are self-destructive. But he's another symptom of the failure of the system. 2/3 of Americans think government is broken, and yet no party has a coherent vision of how it can work better. And that I think is the opportunity. That's what my group at commongood.org and a lot of people we're working with are doing, and that's what Saving Can Do is about.
All right. Again, the book is Saving Can Do, How to Revive the Spirit of America. Philip K. Howard. Thank you very much for your time, and it's a great read. Check it out. I'm sure we'll have you on again soon as you continue to produce more reading material for
Right.
everyone. And I appreciate your time, though.
Right. Nice to be with you, and greetings from my kitchen.
All right. Great. Thanks for
Right.
listening to
Right.
this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.